Hi, Larry.
Good day, my friend.
Uh, the Strait of Hormuz is no longer open. It's now closed again. so
Oh,
it's
they've announced that recently?
they have, yes. So I thought you knew. So just recently they've announced that it's closed again because they make a very valid point because the US has a blockade on Iran. They're like, as long as the US has a blockade, we're gonna shut down the Strait of Hormuz again. And Trump is saying he's going to keep the blockade until they reach a deal. My position is this is all part of the negotiations. You know, you do this, I do that. You don't do this, I don't do that. That's how I see it. But a lot of people, especially in Iran, are not only more pessimistic, but I was just reading an article here. Iranian media is essentially telling people to prepare. There it is. No, it's not it. Prepare for the worst. Like prepare for the continuation of the war. So either it's a very significant bluff on their end, or they're they're in a different mindset to us in the West.
Well, Trump is not serious about seeking a negotiated settlement, and we saw that on Thursday. That so one of Iran's demands was that look, there's got to be a ceasefire in place between Hezbollah and Israel. You can't ignore Hezbollah. Hezbollah has to be part of this. And if it's not, then we're not going to. This process is dead. So the Trump administration, and I'm not sure it was Trump, may have been J.D. Vance, but they pressed forward and put pressure on Israel, and Israel caved and said, okay. So far, that ceasefire has held between Israel and Hezbollah. But at the same time, then you had Scott Bessent come out and announce new sanctions on Iran. Yeah, we're going to collect their money, and we're telling all the Gulf Arabs, go after their bank accounts. And while we're at it, we're going to continue sanctioning Russia and China as well. Now, what I learned early on during my time in government, the purpose of a national security advisor is to coordinate U.S. policy so that everybody's playing from the same sheet of music, that you're not doing contradictory things, like you're not securing a ceasefire on one hand, but then violating doing the exact opposite, because one of Iran's other demands was, hey, end the sanctions. Sanctions got to go away, because otherwise we're not going to talk. And instead they did that. And then, Iran, they, even though the blockade was announced, it was not a real blockade. I mean, you don't have enough ships. The U.S. doesn't have enough ships deployed to actually do an effective blockade. And but even the entire premise of a blockade is nonsensical, because you've got people in the Trump administration that really they're talking as if we just do this blockade, man, it's going to put so much economic pressure on Iran that they're going to have to cave. And I'm looking. Has anybody paid attention to Cuba over the last 66 years? We've had a pretty effective blockade on Cuba, and yet, they're still standing, and they don't have any of the advantages that Iran does. I mean, Cuba's an island. Cuba doesn't have vast natural resources other than some great tobacco and great cigars. Here's Iran, which has, it's got Turkmenistan on its border. It can interact freely, travel through there. Goods can come in. The same with the Caspian Sea and direct access to Russia. So it's just a nonsensical policy. So this, but Iran is being firm. We know what we want. We've told you what we want. If you're serious about doing this, let's go forward. I think a lot of what Trump has been announcing is we got agreement. Oh, yeah, the Iranians are doing everything we tell them to do. No, it's not true. And it's more designed to manipulate the stock market, manipulate the oil market. And these people that are buying into Trump's rhetoric, intelligent people are buying into this. To me, it's shocking. So
Rhetoric, as in he's going to end the war. He wants to walk away from this.
And
I'm.
go ahead.
I don't want to disappoint you. I'm actually one of those people, so don't be disappointed in me, Larry. I just really think he does want to walk away. I don't. I think he will eventually. He will tackle, no matter what concessions there are. I think he's trying to get as little concessions as possible, trying to pressure Iran. But I think he really has no choice. You know, I said the same thing to Joe Kent. I said, like, I feel like there's, and I was saying it to Nima earlier today, the tide is shifting. The days where Netanyahu is the one not misleading, but telling different presidents what to do or pressuring him to do something, I feel like they've, pushed it too far this time around, and I think it's backfiring. Yeah, I could be wrong.
Well, you mean backfiring on Trump?
Backfiring on them. I think Trump is going to turn on Israel now. He's forced. You saw the language he used against Israel. He said, we forbid Israel from bombing Lebanon. Now, how far this goes, whether action will follow, is a different story. But he said he forbids Israel from bombing Lebanon. He's talking about maybe making Lebanon great again. Obviously, that's BS talk. He always says that. And on the Iranian side, I think he'll end up doing business with Iran, even if Israel would go crazy if he does that. I hope he does, because that's putting America first over Israel first. But you don't seem that. Could that happen, or you don't think so?
Well, the problem is you're talking about Trump as if he's a normal, rational human being. Okay,
I get this a lot.
And I admire your willingness to be gracious in that regard. Okay, so it's an element of maturity on your part, but I did an interview with Robert Barnes. I don't know if you know who Robert Barnes is, but he's well plugged in to the White House and particularly through J.D. Vance. There is something fundamentally wrong with Trump in terms of mentally. I've seen physicians online claim that it's symptoms consistent with prefrontal dementia, and the way the couple of the signs of that are the lack of emotional control. So you've seen these outbursts by Trump on, particularly on social media, where he's attacking people that were some of his strongest supporters, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Alex Jones. Megyn Kelly was not seen as a big supporter of his, especially in 2016, but for 2024, she definitely was. He's attacked people, Riley Gaines, the Pope. I mean, he's flying off the handle at everybody.
The Pope was a shock to me. I was speaking to someone who's close to the president as well, and they said, Mario, the statements, the threats about wiping out a civilization, that one didn't come as a surprise to us. Trump's got that kind of characteristic where he just, and I've seen this in business as well. Some people really go hard line and go really aggressive to get what they want. But behind the scenes, they're not going to deliver on whatever threats they make. But most people don't know that. But the thing with the Pope was a bit of a surprise. I think he definitely needs a kind of a filter or a PR team by his side. But you think it's something more sinister. You think, and again, I'm hearing that as well. I haven't looked into it. But some people do have concerns for his mental well-being.
Yeah, they've Robert Barnes said it became noticeable in the fall, last September. And it, like with each passing week, it appears to be more extreme. Now, the other element of the prefrontal dementia is called confabulation, and confabulation is when Trump will say things that he absolutely believes are true, but they're not true. They're lies, or it's wrong, and so he's not one of these people who's being deceptive and lying. He's saying things, like, for example, that Iran has agreed to let us pick up their nuclear dust, as he calls it, and Iran's going, no, we haven't. What are you talking about?
So I had a guest too, and you might know more about this than I. He's like, Mario, the biggest mentor of Trump, I can't remember who it was. The biggest mentor of Trump was Roy Cohn.
Roy Cohn.
Roy Cohn, sorry.
Yeah,
C-O-H-N, Cohn.
Yeah,
and he talks about the three minds. Yeah, please.
Well, I was just going to say, Roy Kahn died on my wife's unit. My wife was the head nurse
Oh wow.
at the National Institutes of Health, and he died there. He died of AIDS. He was a closeted homosexual, and and he hid it for years. But yeah, he was a nasty piece of work. And what you were going to say about Kahn is that the Trump's attitude, you don't basically admit nothing, deny everything, make counter accusations.
And so deny accusations, always go on the attack, and then twist everything into a personal victory. And I think one of them is like you keep repeating something until everyone believes it's true. There's another quote of like, what's true is if you say it enough, it becomes true. Something along those lines.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And so Trump in the past, though, he had a reputation for actually being kind to people. That he played this persona on TV where you're fired, but in reality, because of his insecurities, he was so desperate to be liked. He didn't like having to fire people, and he didn't like getting into a personal conflict. That whatever that was in his mind, man, that's broken, because I mean he's going after people viciously.
He is.
What he did with Marjorie Taylor Greene in particular, when he called her
MTG.
When he called her a traitor, and then she started getting death threats, and she had death threats against one of her children, and so she called him up to say, "Hey, look, your rhetoric is getting me these death threats," and instead of him providing any kind of empathy and saying, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have gone over," no, he basically said, "Oh, you deserve it." I mean, that's a monstrous thing to say. And from the Donald Trump that we knew before, some people say, yeah, that's, well, I'm not surprised by that, but I'm horrified by that. So he's bringing that lack of judgment to the table on this. You're right. He's looking for an exit ramp, but the kind of exit ramp that exists for him, I'm afraid, would require him to make some admissions or concessions that he's not willing to make. And therefore, I think we're on a path of an inevitable collision. And it is his words have been driving the stock market up. What happened yesterday was just, to me, unbelievable. The Dow Jones went up more than 1,000 points, and the oil market was falling down into the 80s.
Yeah,
and
it's still there. It's still below 85, I think.
Yeah, folks,
85.
The oil, the 20% shortage of oil is only now starting to hit countries. It's going to be real. That a lot of people thought that on February 28th and March 1st, right when the war started, that the tap got turned off, and it did. But the supply of the world was not immediately affected, because you had ships on the tankers on the high seas selling to various destinations to offload that oil. Well, all those tankers have now arrived at those destinations. They've offloaded, and you don't have a fresh load of new tankers lined up behind coming in. So from this point forward, the reality of a 20% reduction in the supply of global oil, that is real. The same for liquid natural gas, the same for helium. And that is having an economic effect that's going to drag down the world economy. There's no way to avoid this. Even if today let's say that Iran finally said, okay, we agree with Trump, we're going to do everything that Trump wants. The blockade is lifted, everything is turned back on, and that goes with the assumption that there's not been damage to the ability of the Gulf Arabs to actually pump oil now. But it just assumes that everything's perfect. It's going to be 2 months, minimum 2 months, before the supply is back to where it was on February 27th.
Yeah. But so the oil markets are forward looking, though. And oil is still expensive. Like someone told you a year ago, oil would be at $80. That's a pretty high price. A year ago, oil was in the 50s, 60s, hit the 70s for a tiny bit. in June last year, the 12-day war. But that was about it. Before this was below 60. So a price of 80 something is still high, and maybe they're already forecasting the disruptions. That's why it's not at 50 or 60, or it's not at 60, because they're forecasting that it will take a long time for the economy to recover. But they are forecasting, they're predicting that Trump is going to successfully off ramp. And you said that Trump wants to off ramp, but he doesn't have an off ramp. I think he's in a position where he's trying to get as much as he can, but he's happy just walking away and making his own off ramp, even if he doesn't get concessions. For him to, because when he makes statements like, we're going to walk in and get out enriched uranium, or the Strait of Hormuz is open, or yesterday he took credit for ending the war in Lebanon and Iran, which I applaud his political ability to kind of twist anything into a win. But I think this is a positive thing, because it just shows that he doesn't really need an off ramp. And Iran kind of know this. And I think Iran's in a very strong position to get pretty strong concessions. So I think we'll come out of this where the biggest winner is Iran. The US is somewhere in the middle, and the biggest loser is going to be Israel. That's my prediction.
Well, but Israel is the wild card in this, and they continue to exert quite a bit of influence at least within the legislature, the House and Senate on Capitol Hill. So that's not going away. It is true that when you look at the opinion polls, particularly for men under 50, man, they are decidedly against Israel.
I didn't tell you this, Larry. I didn't tell you. I was speaking to Professor Fuad in Iran, and he said, my audience knows this. I've mentioned it a few times because I was shocked. He goes to me, Mario, most of the young people in the US believe in a one-state solution called the state of Palestine. I'm like, Fuad, you're overdoing it. Come on. I look at the polls in the meantime. 10 to 15% of Americans, 18 to 24, I think, believe in one-state solution of Israel, 10 to 15. 35 to 55%, Larry, believe in a one-state solution called Palestine, and about 60% believe in a two-state solution. So obviously the total is not 100 because some believe in more than one. But it just shows the numbers are staggering, that over about 35 to 55% of young Americans believe in a one-state solution of Palestine. That would be a terrifying number for the Israeli lobby.
Oh yeah, no, but
it takes time.
They live in their own little closeted world of delusion. I mean, again, Israel's not a monolith. You have a good number, albeit a minority, of Israelis that want to live and can live and have lived side by side in peace with the Palestinians. But unfortunately, the majority of Israelis are still committed to this notion that they're going to exterminate the Palestinians, and that they have no legitimate claim. And so that's really that's the whole wild card in this. What I think, what has come out of this war, which was, I don't think certainly anticipated, is the increased activity of Iran on behalf of the Palestinians and Hezbollah. They in the past, Israel wasn't willing to basically send missiles into Israel on behalf of Hezbollah. Now they are.
Yeah. They're standing their ground. They said Lebanon is a red line, and I think that kind of indicates the new world order, for lack of a better term, in the region. That Iran's in a position where, for a long time, they've been very restrained, and that backfired on them. Their restrained was interpreted as weakness by the Israelis in the Americas. That's exactly kind of what led to the war we're in now. So we've put Iran in a position where we've told them, hey, your strategy of restraint and avoiding conflict is what led to conflict. What is Iran going to do now?
Yeah.
Put their foot down when Israel crosses the line. Put their foot down if the Gulf crossed the line. And they're putting their foot down in these negotiations. But look, maybe I'm wrong, because there's a lot of indicators that no. And people smarter than me telling me the same thing. Professor Pape, I keep using as an example. He's like, Mario, he believes the ground operation is imminent. And he's been studying this more than anyone. And he said all indicators are pointing in that direction, because Trump didn't get a win. He needs a win for his legacy. And he doesn't have that. He needs the control of the Strait of Hormuz, of Iran's oil. And Iran is ready for another war. They're preparing for another war. There's cargo planes landing from China. China's delivering air defense systems, allegedly. Man pads almost confirmed. Russia's supplying them. They're clearing the rubble off the missile launchers. They're rebuilding bridges. And if you listen to their state media, Very different discussion. In the US, they've kind of moved on. The war is over. Trump's telling everyone the war is over. In Iran, they're like, guys, the war is not over. We're going to get back to war, prepare for war next week. So I worry that my optimism is again misplaced, because on the American side, Trump is not getting the off-ramp he needs, as you said. And on the Iranian side, they're not getting the concessions they want. And they're more emboldened after their victory, and that them being emboldened means they've just got a lot more incentives to go back into war. They think they've got the upper hand.
Well, look, the United States actually has limited military operations. I disagree with Professor Pape on the so-called ground operation. Yes, the United States is considering right now inserting special operations forces to go after the highly enriched uranium. That would be, in fact, I saw one of these generals on television saying, "Yeah, it'd take 10,000 troops to do it, but yeah, we could do it." And I'm going, okay. Do you realize the C-130, which is the most likely aircraft that would be used to insert troops? One C-130 can carry 90 paratroopers with a combat load. 90. Okay, so just do the math. You've got so you need 10,000 troops. You're going to need, what was that? You're going to need hundreds of C-130s to do that. And then where do they land? Or if you're going to conduct an actual invasion of Iran, because when I hear ground, we've got the ground operations, you're talking something like what we did to Iraq in 2003, where the United States assembled forces, 165,000 in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and then went roaring across the border. Well, we don't really have that luxury. We could assemble those troops right now in Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, but they're within range of even the short-range ballistic missiles out of Iran, not to mention the medium-range or intermediate-range ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. So it's just the United States is not in a position. One, we don't have the forces. I mean, the Army's total strength right now is 452,000. What you'd be talking about is trying to assemble a ground force of, there's just no practical ground solution. So
I agree.
You take that away. What about the Navy? Well, we've seen the Navy, even with the so-called blockade, and I put parentheses around it, because the ships have to stand so far offshore because they're afraid of getting hit by Iran's coastal defense cruise missiles, their short-range ballistic missiles, drones, both underwater, surface level, and then aerial drones. So you basically taken the Navy out of the equation. That just leaves airplanes launching munitions, TLAMs and JDAMs and Tomahawks. But the United States is not even in a position now where it can fly at will over the territory of Iran, because Iran now they've proven, we're told, Trump says, we've wiped out their air defense system. Well, okay, then what has brought down that $250 million drone, the Triton? What's brought down the F-15? What's brought down, so you go down this list of aircraft and drones.
The A-10s, the C-130s, or C-130s were destroyed on the ground, but the A-10 and the F-35 that was damaged as well.
Yeah. So
multiple drones.
Yeah. So let's concede that whatever damage has been done to the Iranian air defense system is not complete at all. And in fact, reportedly, China is now really bolstered. They've built up that capability. I know from talking to one of my friends that they're very, very concerned that Iran is now in a much stronger position. If we go back to the hot war, and try to fly into Iran, that I was told with no hesitation, says, we're going to lose pilots. And then then we're going to face that spectacle of American pilots being paraded around on television, perhaps.
Yeah, China's reportedly supplying HQ9s. Not sure if you've looked into them, but some people say they're even more capable than the S3 and S400s from Russia. Reportedly, it's impossible to know. So that's why I'm leaning more to a war is highly unlikely. Now, there might be, right after Robert Pape, I had Colonel McGregor, who was somewhere in the middle. He said there'll be a 4 or 5 day bombing campaign before Trump concedes to try to get Iran to concede, but it won't work.
Yeah.
I think that's possible, even though I still think it's highly unlikely, because Iran would retaliate in very, very aggressively, as in close the Strait of Hormuz, strike the Gulf more than they did before, because they're kind of fed up. They've been through multiple negotiations, and then throughout the negotiations, they get struck. And now, if it happens again, there's only so far you could push, because the country's like, screw this, we're going all out. And I think we should take advantage of the kind of off ramp, because Iran doesn't want this war either. And I think Iran wants to end the war based on their terms. And I think we will see the beginning of American bases slowly getting out of the region. They're not needed. It's a practical thing to do. Joe Kent was telling me that people were talking about this in the administration for years. And now, now there's a reason to do it, but it's got to be done in a way where it doesn't demonstrate just a complete loss. I just think it's the best case, the most logical case, Larry, is Trump is like, we're going to do business with Iran. And he's probably pissed at Netanyahu. He probably blames Netanyahu for this war behind the scenes, for the intelligence from Mossad, which I don't know how it worked. I really don't know. I posted last night before going to sleep. I'm like, the war is over, but I'm really curious who the hell was able to convince Trump into this war. What type of intelligence? Because Trump was, he's got the people in the White House giving him the advice that matters. Like, hey, this is a bad idea. We shouldn't do this. Iran will close the Strait of Hormuz. They will strike the Gulf. And then there's the people in Mar-a-Lago, the people with the big money, the donors, etc. They're like, this is your chance. You'll be on Mount Rushmore. This is great for your legacy. And I just don't know what tipped him over the edge. But whatever it is, I think he's pretty pissed off now to a level where we will see a very different U.S.-Iran relations. And if, depending on the next administration, it could end up normalizing the relations between the two countries, because there is no reason not to, Larry, other than Israel. Other than Israel, there's no reason for the U.S. not to have the same relationship with Iran as they did under the Shah in the 70s.
Yeah, the entire relationship with Iran, it was poisoned in the 1980s. The 1980s really was the critical decade that has completely shaped U.S.-Iranian relations, because it was in the 80s that basically the United States not only backed, we weren't a sort of a passive supporter, we were an aggressive part of Saddam Hussein's attack on Iran and that 8-year war. We provided basically the chemical weapons that were used, or the precursor chemicals that were used to make them. We provided intelligence so that Iraq's military forces would know where to attack Iran. And Iran at that time, was legitimately trying to support Hezbollah. Hezbollah emerged in 82. It was in the midst of this, the civil war in Lebanon. And because the Shia were being attacked, and then when Israel invaded, there was always that tension between the Shia and the Palestinians with the PLO. PLO was very much a secular organization. PLO advocated a two-state solution, and the Hezbollah was coming in and saying, no, just a one state. And so the United States was basically at war with Hezbollah. Hezbollah was retaliating. Iran was supporting them. And so that's where that whole, I'll call it, it's not mythology, but the whole narrative that Iran is a supporter of terrorism, because Iran was supporting Hezbollah, and Hezbollah was in a battle against the United States.
I think the term terrorism, Larry, you know more than anyone. It's a politicized, weaponized term in most cases.
Yeah, exactly right. It's really sort of meaningless. But out of that, we failed to appreciate, and it didn't help that the pictures. If you ever saw the pictures of the Ayatollah Khomeini, I mean, he had this very angry, he wasn't like Uncle Co. He wasn't a warm, cuddly kind of guy. And so then the mythology that Iran was the strict, religious, fanatical, Sharia law kind of place. And I just saw, I think it was Reuters or somebody just shot a news story in Iran where they're going around talking to people on the street. And 90% of the women that appeared in this video, they didn't have head coverings. Walking along, and so Iran is actually lightened up. It is not that
even
severe.
if, but Larry, even if it has it, I think if you're going to criticize Iran because they force women to wear hijab, I believe in secularism. I'm an open-minded person. That was in Saudi. No one was talking about Saudi. You can criticize them for that, but that's not a reason to want to force regime change in a country because you don't agree in the way they run their country.
Correct.
Countries evolve at their own pace. I want to read out something I wrote. When did I write this? About a week ago. On how, so that was April 15th. No, 3 days ago. Wow. Okay. So I've said this before and I'll say it again. Trump made a mistake starting this war, but made the right decision ending it and can still turn it into a win for the US and the region. This is how. One, accept a proposal similar to the pre-war Oman offer, which includes an essential dismantling of their nuclear program. So Iran was open to give up their nuclear program to an extent, for a certain number of years. In the Oman negotiations, they were open to do that.
Yeah,
and if they agree to do that, Trump should take that. So that's number one. Number two is offer to unfreeze Iranian assets and lift the sanctions in exchange for Iran dismantling their proxy network or their allied network, especially Hezbollah. So I think there could be a deal where, depending what the financial compensations are, Iran may accept to dismantle Hezbollah as a military wing, obviously with security guarantees for Lebanon. I think Iran would stand their ground this time around for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how those guarantees would look like. And for Hezbollah to merge with the Lebanese military and remain as a political bloc. But in return, Iran has to get some concessions from the US, and that involves significant amount of assets that are unfrozen and the lifting of sanctions. Number three, so it's only 4 points. Number three is an optional point. Allow a very temporary Iranian booth, a toll booth at the Strait of Hormuz, which is, he's already done that. They're charging a toll right now for ships as part of the reparations. And if lucky, Iran may kick back a small percentage of the process to the US, which I don't think will happen. And lastly is force Israel to withdraw from Lebanese territories as Hezbollah's military wing gets dismantled. So essentially, unfreeze Iranian assets. Iran may give up on their proxy network as a strategy. That depends on Mujtaba and how he's going to approach foreign policy. And the nuclear program go back to the Oman offer and just walk out. That's it. No need to do anything. Keep the regime as is. Let Israel take care of its own security. Iran would not attack Israel. The Palestinian issue is another thorny issue, which also needs to get resolved. But I think that should be separated because it's a lot more complex. But I think if he does that, we can look at this and say, maybe it's a win. Assuming he does the impossible, and that's be able to get Israel to pull out of Lebanon and merge Hezbollah into the Lebanese armed forces.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I agree with you that, that is one, that's a proposal that could work.
Do you think Iran will accept it?
I don't think Iran will not accept having to cut off assistance to, what we call the proxies, to the Houthis, to the Hezbollah, and to Hamas. The one thing about Iran is that they've actually been pretty principled, in their support of external groups, in contrast to the United States. The United States during those 1980s, at the very time that we're basically helping Iraq carry out war against Iran, we then get into the arms for hostages deal with Iran-Contra, where we're giving Iran weapons to kill Iraqis.
This is a disgusting war. It's a disgusting war.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I hate to say this about my country, but we've had no concern or regard. We view people from other countries as mere pawns to be used, whatever's the expedient issue at the moment, without any kind of genuine concern. We treat them like they're subhuman. And so if we kill a bunch of them, who cares? No, there's no sweat off our nose. But the Iranians have been pretty consistent. They know what their interests are. They know what they're fighting for, what they're supporting, and I don't see them backing away from that. They're not going to sacrifice principle just to get a deal.
Is it sacrificing principle if let's move to Hezbollah, because it's like the biggest issue right now, and the same way the Palestinian issue is like a source of a lot of instability in the region, probably the biggest source. A close second is right now Lebanon. It's an indicator of where the region is heading. When we saw a few years ago, it was like a power struggle between Saudi and Iran in Lebanon. Saudi supporting one group, Iran supporting another, and Iran won that power struggle because Hezbollah has the most influence and the most representation in the government. I don't know how Lebanon pulled off a democratic government despite all the instability and it being a failed state. So I applaud them for that. Now, but if there's a pragmatic deal where there is security guarantees for Lebanon, Israel pulls out of Lebanon, and the Lebanese armed forces are rearmed by a group of countries, maybe the Gulf and Iran, maybe the US, maybe France, maybe all of them, is rearmed to act as a deterrent against Israeli aggression and offer security in their country, then there is a scenario, I think, where Iran wouldn't abandon Hezbollah, because they haven't. They've shown this time around. I think they abandoned them before because Iran didn't want confrontation. Now, some people disagree that they did abandon them. I think they did. But this time they're not, because they know they're in a strong position and they know the strategy of restraint backfired. But I wouldn't consider it abandoning if they continue supporting Hezbollah, but then you say, Hezbollah, we need you to merge with the Lebanese military, the armed forces that is very popular with the people, and we managed to broker a deal that offers you security that Israel will pull out or has pulled out of the territory, and then we'll rearm the Lebanese military. That could be a solution that is not abandonment, but more of a pragmatic solution that avoids Lebanon continuing to be a battlefield, which then maybe leads to a broader... because once we see the shift of power from Israel more to Iran, and maybe normalization between the Gulf and Iran, that could... the indications of that working could begin in Lebanon, which is that main battlefield of the proxies. Not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, look, Lebanon is such a tragic country in terms of, I mean, it's always been caught in the middle between different competing forces. I mean, back in the 80s, you had Bashar Assad in Syria, and his father Hafez first, and then it was Hafez at the time, I guess, was the big problem. So they were manipulating the certain groups. Amal, I think, in particular, was aligned with them.
That's true.
And then
Larry, you know a lot of details about Lebanon, the intricate details that not many people know.
Yeah, well, when you look at the divisions that have torn it apart, and man, if Lebanon could find a way to reconcile internally, they would actually then it would be an island of some stability in the region. But I don't know if that's possible. But
I agree.
But today Lebanon is probably in the weakest condition that it ever has been, and over the years, in the 1980s, Hezbollah, let's call them more, I'll say they're more of a criminal outfit. I mean, they were a militant. They didn't have a sort of a political vision, but today, 45 years later, Hezbollah is they are a state within a state. I mean, they've got political, social, economic. It's not just military. They are an organic entity, and so it's not just a matter of getting them to stop fighting. What's so sad is the Palestinians themselves bear some blame for this over the years, because the Palestinians fought amongst themselves, where the PLO was actually despised by the Shia. I'm told in southern Lebanon. I got chastised because I'd misspoken regarding the start of the civil war in '75. That there were some Shia villages in southern Lebanon that actually welcomed the Israeli invasion in '82. They were throwing rice at them. Yeah, you're here. But that evaporated pretty quickly.
They celebrated whose invasion?
The Israeli invasion.
Interesting. Yeah. So because a lot of Lebanese people, the ones even that despise Israel, they also blame Palestinians because they came to their country. They dragged Israel there, and
Right.
but
Right.
like I empathize with the Palestinians. They're being kicked out of their country, and when you're a resistance group, you do anything it takes. During World War II, resistance groups started operating from outside the countries they were resisting in,
Correct.
especially the leadership. That's just the way it works. But yeah,
Now,
sorry, I was going to
no,
say
no.
you've articulated the situation in Lebanon. I hope the audience really paid attention, really, really well. How Hezbollah started and how he's become. It's more than a military wing, cannot be simplified as such. But also how so many other countries, you went back all the way to Assad, had their fingers in that pot. And that's why I've always said Lebanon is kind of that indicator, that barometer of what's happening in the region. When there's a fight between Iran and Saudi, you're going to see the results of it on the battlefield in countries like Lebanon, especially Lebanon. Same thing with Israel and Iran, the US and whatever country as well. So Lebanon's always that indicator. And I'm on the Lebanese side though, Larry. I'm just so... You know me, I'm always trying to be not only nuanced, but like try to look at things objectively. Like when Israel does something horrible, I'm like, even Smotrich, I look at his post that he did a post a few days ago and I responded to it very aggressively. But before I did, I'm like, what is he thinking? Let me go through, read his other posts, try to understand his mindset. I struggled with him. He's just a lost case. But on the Israeli side, what they're doing in South Lebanon, Larry, like, come on. Like, I was making the argument that Israel had the right to defend itself against Hezbollah. And if Hezbollah's gone, I think Israel would pull out of Lebanon or stop the war. I was 60% convinced, as I've always said. Now I'm 50-50 or almost the opposite side, because what's happening in Lebanon is disgusting. Like that, yeah. I really don't. I think that impunity won't last for long, but it still has a few years, and they're squeezing every single drop of that lemon before their time of impunity ends. And I think Iran, this war with Iran and the strategic win of Iran, I think people don't understand how massive the shift will be in the region.
Yeah, no, it destroys the myth of U.S. invincibility, and we've been a lot of people have imagined or bought into the narrative that the United States is so strong militarily you can't resist them, and yet here in the last 12 months, because it was a year ago in March that they launched Operation Rough Rider. The Trump administration launched Operation Rough Rider in the Red Sea against the Houthis, and their attitude was, we're not a bunch of weaklings like the Biden administration. By God, we're going to show these Houthis who's boss. We're going to bring down the full weight of the U.S. military. And so for 7 weeks, we were going to allow freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. And after 7 weeks, the United States withdrew. I mean, Trump did a classic Trump thing. He declared victory. Okay, the Houthis have capitulated. I say so, and let's go. Then we pulled out the aircraft carrier. But in the course of that 7 weeks, we were losing one MQ-9 Reaper drone per week. Those are $35 million a pop. So right off the bat there, you lost close to $250 million worth of drones. And we were unable to defeat the Houthis. Even though we killed a bunch of Houthis, we bombed their country, but it showed the limits of U.S. power. Now jump ahead to February.
Why with that one? Why the Houthis? So I understand with Iran, they had a lot of things underground. I haven't looked into the operation against the Houthis. What failed? Because they don't have the same network as Iran. They don't have the same capabilities as Iran.
It's the limits of air power. You can only bomb so much, and when people are underground and they've got a bunker, underground bunkers and are protected, you can't destroy all that. The only way to actually destroy that is to put troops in on the ground and go in and fight a land war. And that this has been a sort of a fantasy of the Air Force, Army Air Corps. Yeah, it goes back to World War II. They actually the planners in both the UK and the United States believe that they just dropped enough bombs that they would force Germany to surrender, and that turned out not to be true. So, but that has persisted. U.S. did it again, tried to do it in Vietnam. We ran those B-52s that were bombing North Vietnam. That was going to force them into submission. It doesn't work. You actually have to put troops in on the ground. And the United States is not willing to do that, not willing, and actually lacks the force structure now to do that. And because the advent of these cruise missiles and these ballistic missiles now that are quite they're prolific, and they're not like the Scuds were 23 years ago. There have been significant advances, and then the drones. So you've now taken away the ability of a country like the United States to send a force overseas into an assembly area, because you have to have an assembly area for those forces to get together, to get the resources in place so that they could then launch a ground operation. That really has become almost impossible anymore for any country, whether it's Russia or China, United States. They can't do it. Russia could do it in going into Ukraine simply because they're assembling right in their own country. Okay, so they don't have that logistics issue, but the logistics that are involved in trying to send troops overseas, that's a challenge.
So let's go with the scenario that the war has not ended for whatever reason, whether Trump has not achieved his objectives, whether this is all a facade right now with a planned operation to continue. Obviously, we'll put ground operation aside because it just does sound suicidal based on everyone I speak to, or most people I speak to. So if the war will continue, what would you expect to happen? What would make most sense on the American side?
Well, the U.S., it's going to be the economic pressure that's ultimately going to force the United States to change policy.
I've got Steve Hanke right after this time. I'll be talking because of that exact reason. Steve Hanke, you might know him, professor of applied economics at Johns Hopkins University. I'm speaking to him about that exact reason because last time I spoke to him, he said to me, Mario, the economy has no way of sustaining this war. Not put aside months, even weeks. That was a discussion we had about 2 weeks ago. So
I'd
very
agree.
Important point.
Yeah, I'd agree with that because we're not talking about localized effects. We've had a significant disruption in the supply chain, and Commodore Steve Jeremy. I don't know if you know who he is. He appears frequently on Danny Davis's channel, but he was a naval officer in the British Navy. But he presented a chart last week that showed the correlation between energy, GDP, and I forget the other aspect, but basically this drop in supply of energy, that the GDP is going to follow that same angle, the same direction. And so what we're looking at here is it's not just an isolated disruption. This is a global disruption in the supply chain, and it affects everything.
Everything.
And so
when you add microchips, it's all your electronics get affected. The fertilizer affects the entire food supply. Oil has multiple applications. From going on a holiday will be impacted. Just inflation in general will take a hit. Economic relations, because globalization as an experiment will start to look like a failure. All countries will have to start thinking inwards and stop exports. I'm not an economist, but I remember studying in university. I did study banking and finance, and I studied the concept of globalization. All depends on a system that is operating flawlessly, especially with the whole just-in-time process now, where everything's kept low supply for efficiency, but you have to get it on time. Any disruptions that we've seen in COVID could have disastrous consequences, and that's happening.
Yeah, and so I think it'll ultimately be that economic pressure, which again, it's going to hit internally into the United States. So it will become an issue. So why are we spending money we don't have overseas in these mindless military adventures? But then countries that were allies of the United States or perceived allies, again, for their own economic survival, they'll be adopting policies and taking positions that will be antithetical to the U.S. So we're going to see this era of the United States as the dominant superpower in the world. That's over. It's coming to an end. And the emergence of the BRICS countries as an alternative financial system, it's real. There are a lot of people in denial about it, trying to pretend all of that's not significant. And China is going to be the major player in this, and that is and they are positioned to do so because the key is energy, power, electricity, and they there's no other country in the world that can compare with what China has done with foresight to create not just nuclear power, coal power, sun powered. They've got massive solar fields out in the deserts. That a good place to put them. There's nobody out there, no animals running around, and yet that sunlight is collected and that energy is then distributed throughout the power grid. So, yeah, I think that's going to force the United States into a realization that we can't continue this war, and however uncomfortable it's going to be, they're going to have to accept an agreement to live and let live with Iran. I don't see. I don't think Iran will surrender at all its right to enrich uranium. They're going to insist on that now.
Yeah. I'm going to show you a quick video of the military movements that are happening. Not sure if you're keeping track of this because, what is it? Don't trust the words, trust the action, or something like that. Or actions speak louder than words. Also, in the meantime, Iran is reviewing U.S. proposals while publicly swearing it will never compromise even slightly. So essentially, Iran is saying, Trump is saying, who was using that same strategy, but they're saying we will not make even the slightest compromise, retreat, or leniency, and will defend with all its strength the interests of the Iranian nation. I think that's Mustafa Khamenei made that statement. But in the meantime, these are the U.S. military cargo ships that have been moving on a daily basis to the region. I'm sure you've been watching them, and that's been happening daily. We're seeing similar movements to Iran. How likely are those just restocking as expected versus preparing for something? How do we know the difference?
Well, I am told by some active duty military people that initial force that we deployed to the region, leading up to February 28th, they basically go with a supply level for 45 to 50 days. Okay. Well, that's where we are right now. We're at that 45 to 50 day window. So I think a lot of that activity, what you're seeing, is the resupply to put those forces back into a position where they had the supplies they did when they started. But you also can't rule out that what I've heard, Danny Davis has heard it, Doug McGregor, that there is a plan that was on the table for conducting a massive, that when the ceasefire ends, the United States would conduct a massive bombing missile strike designed to try to compel Iran to surrender.
Yeah, Doug Douglas told me the same thing. He told me the same thing. He said on Monday he expects a 5-day massive bombardment. Obviously, we can't know for sure, but this is the worry of his.
Now, but we've also heard that there now has been, that may have been taken off the table, and instead there's going to be this effort to launch a special operations force to try to take highly enriched uranium out of Iran.
That sounds crazier.
Yeah, it is. No argument there. But what all of this means, though, is the United States they've not backed away from entertaining military options. And you'll know that peace is at hand when that flow of air traffic is just one direction going back to the United States, where we put our foot on the brake, and then we put the car in reverse, and we start withdrawing these forces. So they have not ruled out further military action. And Iran itself is quite prepared. Said, okay, that's likely what's going to happen. We're prepared, and we'll deal with it.
The Iranian commander said the following: if the war resumes, that was while we're speaking. So you see me looking down. I'm looking at the news in the last hour.
Yeah.
If the war resumes, Iran will use missiles that were built just this month. They can't stop Iran's missile building capabilities. If the war resumes, it will become global this time. So Iran is still building missiles despite all the bombardment they've gone through.
Correct.
And I've been told that they're building missiles underground.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you know much about that? They are? Do you think they are?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Alistair Crook's really sort of the expert on that. He's been in those missile cities, but it was Iran embarked upon building these underground structures back in 2004. It was a consequence. They watched what the United States did to Iraq in 2003, and they realized, okay, anything that's a surface level, it's going to get wiped out. And so the designs that they pursued were designs that the West had developed for how do you survive a nuclear attack. So they built these underground cities. They call them missile cities, but these underground facilities across the country that are designed to a level to survive a nuclear attack. So that's they're serious about it, and they've developed that. That's why when Trump said, "Oh yeah, we've obliterated their nuclear capability," no, we hadn't.
But that's Trump. That's like I always take his words with a grain of salt. But then this kind of perplexes me even more. Goes back to the question I asked yesterday: what piece of intelligence convinced Trump to take that decision? Like what? It just sounds such. It's so obvious it wasn't going to work. That's really what perplexes me. Why this was done.
He was. I call him a victim and part of an intelligence operation. So. The USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, with the CIA and MI6 working, if you will, behind the scenes, they set up this company that did online polling because they claimed that you can't do conventional telephone polling. Call people up and say, "Hi, we want to know your opinion on this." They said because in Iran, people were too afraid to tell the truth. So they set up this company that did polling over the computer, which I think is equally nonsensical. Anybody that's ever had a teenage boy or girl know that a lot of times they'll get online and pretend to be an adult in chat rooms and such. So you can always use deception. But that polling produced results that said that 80% of the Iranians were opposed to the Islamic Republic, that 80% would rise up in support. And so that was CIA messaging, but it became the truth, what was believed. And so here's the head of Mossad telling Trump, "We've got it. This is guaranteed. 80% of the Iranians are going to rise up, and if we decapitate the leadership, you've got this mass of Iranians that'll be freed. They'll be so happy to be free of this oppression." And he bought into it. It was a lie. It's not true.
But no one tell him, "Hey, Mr. President, there's 100 years of examples of an air operation alone failing to achieve regime change." Just anyone being able to give him that simple fact. That's what really perplexes me.
Yeah. See, I've been, I lived through this back when I was at CIA. I started off as the Honduran analyst during the time that we were running the wars in Central America. And Honduras was one of the top 5 foreign policy priorities for the Reagan administration back then. And evidence of that is, as an analyst, I was writing for the Presidential Daily Brief at least 2 and sometimes 3 times per week. The average analyst to get an article published in the Presidential Daily Brief, they were lucky if they did it 1 a month. Okay. So I was doing it 2 to 3 times a week. But we had convinced ourselves of a particular narrative. And yet when you tried to go and there are senior intelligence officials who interact with the politicians, and more often than not, they get corrupted with the politics. And I remember on one occasion, I was doing a brief and to the National Intelligence Officer for Latin America, a guy named Bob Vickers. And I said something, I was just saying, and the Contras, because the Contras were based in Honduras and Costa Rica. And as soon as I said Contras, he said, "Stop. You can't call them the Contras. You must call them the Nicaraguan Democratic Resistance." And I went, but Reagan calls them Contras. He goes, "Yeah, but he's the president." So when you see that, I use that just to illustrate that how an intelligence official that should be objective and just the facts, ma'am, is instead pandering to the political side of the house. So you don't actually get the intelligence in front of the president, or the president refuses to look at it or listen to the intelligence. And that's not unique to Trump. I mean, I've seen that, that's happened. My first exposure to it was with Ronald Reagan, and I guarantee it went on with George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and then Trump, all of them. And when they get locked into a policy, they do not want to hear dissenting information that might destroy their worldview.
How easy is it to, as a final kind of a question, how easy is it to mislead a president?
Oh, very easy. You control the information flow. That's where the chief of staff is critical. Now, the problem, in my opinion, the absolute best chief of staff in the last 50 years was James Baker. He was not an ideologue, and the team with George H.W. Bush, where you had James Baker and Brent Scowcroft. Brent was the national security advisor. Again, just a tremendous individual in my view. But we haven't had two people of that quality in those. Now we got Marco Rubio. Oh my God.
What do you think about Susie Wiles?
Who? Oh, Susie Wiles.
Susie.
Yeah, she's a problem. I mean, she's
a problem.
Yeah, big problem. I mean, she was, helped run Bibi Netanyahu's campaign, and she has been the gatekeeper that until recently, according to reports, was withholding information from Trump. Made sure that all Trump was getting was the positive information. Hey, we're winning. This is great. Look at Trump. He genuinely still believes that he's got 100%. That CNN poll said I got 100% support. At that point, you got to say, sir, I think you're being lied to, because you are shedding support like a dog with long hair sheds their hair.
Larry, just I know I said last question. I have one more thing I want to ask you about. Is what do you know about Mujtaba Khamenei, if anything? It's been very hard to get any information about his well-being, his state of mind, what his policy is. So mainly about his policy, how do you think he'll be? Similar to his father? Will there be differences? How do you think the war's changed his mindset or his approach to foreign policy?
Well, no, I think he'll be much harder than his father. You remember, he's a combat vet. When he was 17 years old, he joined the Iranian Revolutionary Guard during the Iraq-Iran War. He joined in, I think it was 1987. He fought in 3 major battles. I don't know if he was ever wounded. I don't know if he was ever present when chemical weapons were used. I would imagine that was true. But he forged relationships with IRGC. Remember, the guys that he was with, so we're talking 40 years ago, and you're 17, 18 years old. Now those guys are 58, 59. They're your friends. And so there's nothing like forging friendships in battle. That when you are with a group of men and young men, and facing life and death, one of those attacks that he was faced with was carried out by the MEK. Remember the Mujahideen Aqal? Which now is supported by the CIA, funded, supported, backed. So he brings he's not just a religious scholar. And he's not one of these silver spoon kids, just because his father was the supreme leader. He had to, he had to do his own thing. He became a religious scholar in the aftermath of that combat, but that combat experience, I think, shaped his life. And I think the reason you're not seeing or hearing much from him in public, they recognize the West wants to kill him if they can. And so there's no need for him to go out in public at this point and stay behind the scenes. But he also brings to it, and put yourself in his position. You're going to deal with Israel and the United States, and they've killed your father, they've killed your mother, they've killed your wife, they've killed your baby daughter. You know what? I know what my reaction would be, and it would not be charitable. Yeah, he's not going to take a line where they're going to surrender Iran's interests. They're going to hold the line. He'll hold the line firm, but he's got a whole cadre of friends, I believe, that are in the IRGC, in the Army, in the intelligence services.
Yeah, and I'm going to have. I think an important factor, as you've talked about, is the economic impact of this. I told you Professor Steve Hank is coming on. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins University to discuss the economic ramifications of this. Me and him spoke when this war was ongoing, and his warning was very dire, very, very dire, which is one of the reasons I thought the war was going to end soon, because I knew Trump would be facing massive pressure from the donors that will be impacted by this, which is a big chunk of them. And I think they've become louder than whatever donors are convincing him to continue this war. And he always watches the markets as well. So that's what gave me hope that the war is ending. But I talked to him about the impact of the war is going to be felt for months to come anyway, even if the war is ended.
Yeah.
But also what leverage Iran has, because that's, as me and you were talking about earlier, I think this is the biggest weapon, the nuclear weapon that Iran has is the Strait of Hormuz, which is a chokehold on the global economy.
Yeah.
But Larry, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
I enjoy our conversations.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it as always, Larry. Thank you.
All right, man. We'll talk later. Bye-bye.